The story of Esther is set in a dark time for many of God's people. They're a long way from the promised land. It's one of the final narrative books written during the 400 silent years between the two testaments. The Israelites are in exile, far from their homeland, because of disobedience, unable to practice their faith with a temple, priests, or sacrifices. A whole generation has passed, and many still have chosen or are still not returned from captivity. They're in exile because they've broken the covenant with God. The Israelites are left wondering, left asking, has God finished with us? Has he deserted us? In a foreign land, living among pagans, unable to worship, they wondered, are God's promises still true for us? After all, they had compromised, and their sin was as great as that of the nations around them. And as our story has unfolded, if you've been with us over the last month and a half actually, it seems like evil is winning. We've followed our hero and heroine, two tiny specks living in obscurity in a vast Persian kingdom. Mordecai, just a humble Jew serving at the king's gate. At just the time when Mordecai should be honoured, Haman, the enemy of the Jews, is promoted to the highest position in the kingdom. All power's given to him. And he goes about establishing a decree to destroy, kill, and annihilate all of God's people. The ancient battle, since the servant slithered out of the garden, between good and evil, between God's people and their adversary, seems to be on the point of defeat. And although all through this story, God doesn't appear. But maybe, just maybe, we have seen whispers of an unseen God in the just happens, or the moments, or the coincidences. Perhaps, maybe, even though we don't see him or have him mentioned, God is working. You know, I think the author intentionally has made God absent in this telling of the story. Maybe his omission teaches the fundamental lesson that when God seems most absent in human affairs, he may be most present and at work. But then, 2 weeks ago, when Al was here, there's a moment of irony. The tables begin to turn. Haman, who sought to execute Mordecai early, is forced to honour him. Is God going to raise up like he did in the past and rescue his people again? Can we dare hope in a land far from the promised land under the pagan king that God has not forgotten us? And this is the message of Esther. And Esther isn't just a historical record. It's actually written for the purpose to be read at an annual festival, sorry to steal your thunder, Mark, every year. It's called the Megillah, and the Jews have been celebrating this for over 2,000 years. It's called, the Megillah is what they call the book of Esther. The festival is called Purim, the roll of the dice, which is actually why we went with the title, Is God at Vegas? And I actually feel a little bit bad about that, because of course he is. I did look online, there are some really good churches in Vegas. Canyon Ridge Church, if you're listening, you're doing an awesome job. And Hope Church in Vegas, great, it looks like you're doing an awesome job too. But this story is, and so the Jews celebrate this each year, and it's celebrated with joy and celebration and a lot of wine, emphasizing the goodness of God when he seems absent. In fact, banquet is mentioned 20 times in the book of Esther and only 24 times in the entire rest of the Old Testament. This is a party. And it's written like a party. It's loud, it's festive, and it's even a little bit chaotic. And this is the context of Esther's story. And the narrator is clearly asking us to consider what and reflect on where our heroes find themselves. Jews, Mordecai and Esther, in the middle of a foreign land, in a dark place where God is not honoured, under the reign of a dark superpower. Does God still work when he is not seen? What unspoken lessons can we learn about the unspoken God that we see? And so we're going to read chapter 7. It's the central act. It's the one we've all been waiting for. Haman gets it. And I know Al really wanted this one, but I got it. And just to clarify, if you aren't here before, to set the scene, Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. He has the king's ring of power. He is the one who set in motion the decree to destroy, kill, and annihilate the Jews, including all of those in Jerusalem, to wipe the people of God off the planet, from whom the promised Messiah was to come. And we sense that there's a turning of the tide. Just last time we were looking at this, the chapter, Haman was going to the king to ask permission to impale Mordecai, it'll say hang in your Bible, impale Mordecai on a stake he'd set up outside his house 22 metres high. By the way, a rugby post, I've been told, is 16 metres. There's no overcompensation there at all. But rather than getting permission, he has to honour Mordecai. Oh, the humiliation. Now, when the Jews celebrate Esther and read the Megillah each year, they celebrate with a whole bunch of fun. And Haman, the evil one, is never to be spoken or heard of again. And so they have these things called the Rahashim. They're called noisemakers. And the aim is to drown out the name of Haman. So whenever Haman is read as they recite Esther, there is boos, there is hisses, and there is noise to drown out the name of Haman. So I've handed out some of these. Alice, you can have the last one. And so we're going to have some fun, because that is how this book is read. And so when Haman is read, it is noisy and it is lots of jeers. But when Mordecai is said, there is cheers, there is celebration, because perhaps God is going to come through. God does come through. And that's what this book is about. So, are you ready? We'll find out, because Haman's in the first sentence. Let's read this chapter. So the king and Haman went to the feast with Queen Esther, and on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, good. There's a lot of wine drinking, but probably not to be celebrated. The king said to Esther, no doubt in a drunken slur, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted. And what is your request? even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." The Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favour in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." At this point, I think Haman's ears were pricking up. "If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for the affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king." Esther's smart here. Haman had offered $810 million to take out the Jewish people from the whole Persian Empire. Esther is saying, do you know losing the Jews is going to be worth vastly more than that? So wouldn't it be compared to the loss of the king? And then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he? And who dared say this?" Now, in Hebrew, we lose this. It's 6 single-syllable words that apparently, as you say them, sound like a machine gun going off. He was angry. The wine goblet would have been slammed down on the table. "Whoever comes after my queen comes after me. Who dares attack me?" Remembering he has just honoured Mordecai for remembering when he was last double-crossed. And Esther said, "A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." And Haman dropped his fork. Then Haman, terrified before the king and queen, and the king arose from his wrath and his wine drinking and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life of Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. You think? And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Queen Esther was. And the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?" And as the words left his mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, I love this, one of the eunuchs in attendance said to the king, "Hey, you know that guy that just told you that you just honoured for honouring you? Well, Haman set up a 22 high metre pole to hang him on it." He said, "Moreover, the gallows that Haman prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 22 metres high." And the king said, "Hang him on that." So they hung Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And then the wrath of the king abated. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king as Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Well done, people, well done. Though God seemed silent, he was at work behind the scenes, orchestrating events that no one could have planned to bring about his plan of salvation. And the story of Esther is not just written for the Jews in the silent years for when it was written, but it's written for us today as well. In a world where God's presence often feels hidden, we too, in the midst of trials and darkness, are called to trust a God that is still working though we don't see him. So what can we learn from our chapter today? I think the first point that we can learn is that God is still working. It just so happened? Yeah, right. The story of Esther demonstrates that God's plans can never be thwarted. No matter how dark things get, God is still at work. In the circumstances, in the coincidences, in the events, even though we don't understand it. Proverbs picks up this thought in Proverbs 16. The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. God is all over this story with his providence in the background of all the proceedings described in this book. It shows that we cannot tell what God might be doing at that time in history when we experience it. We only live in the day, today. But history shows that God works. From the events of Mordecai overhearing a plot against the king, to the king's sleepless night the day before he hangs Haman, the hand of a sovereign God is seen. Paul picks this up in Romans, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. God works for good. May not be your good, but for good. Every day is a fresh, blank sheet of paper given us by God, and we can never tell what wonderful surprises he may choose to write upon it. On any particular day, remarkable developments and answers to our prayers may take place as God chooses to unfold his will and demonstrate his care for us. Do you believe that? Do you trust and in faith step out believing that he is working even though you don't see it? Esther and Mordecai weren't passive. They weren't waiting to see what God would do. They took action and saw God work. They saw them as they acted. And I love the verse that Richard brought to us, because Mordecai just shows this so much in this verse, in the Message translation. If you persist in staying silent at a time like this, help and deliverance will arrive for the Jews from someplace else, but you and your family will be wiped out. Who knows? Maybe you were made queen for just a time as this. You see, God is still at work. Even if we don't see him, even if we don't understand it with what's happening to us, God is still at work. The second thing I think we can learn from this chapter is that evil has an expiry date. Haman is the classic example of poetic justice, or the poster boy for being hoist on your own petard, which is a phrase apparently made famous by Shakespeare that I learnt out, and petard means fart. But essentially when they were blowing up the doors of the enemy, if you didn't get out of the way of your explosion in time, you were hoist by your own petard. And here we have Haman in his pride and his arrogance and in his selfish evil intentions towards God's people, and it ultimately leads to his own downfall. As the scriptures say in Psalm 37, the wicked watch for the righteous and seek to put him to death, but the Lord will not abandon him to his power, or let him be condemned when he is brought to trial. Wait for the Lord and keep his way, and he will exalt you to inherit the land. You will look on when the wicked are cut off. Esther literally looked at her feet and watched the wicked be cut off. And this is picked up in Galatians. Chapter 6 says, "Don't be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that he will reap." Haman's story is a reminder that evil and disobedience is self-deceptive. Driven by pride, Haman sought to destroy the Jews. But in the end, he set himself up against God's will and was defeated. In the story of Esther, we're reminded that God's will bring to justice even the hidden things. As it says in Numbers, "And be sure your sins will find you out. Be sore the wrongs that you have done. Don't think God will leave them unaccounted for." You see, evil has an expiry date because we know that in a moral universe, all bills must be paid. All bills must be paid. Evil has an expiry date. Judgment will come. Haman didn't see it coming until it was too late. He had no idea he was attending his Last Supper. How are you living? What are you trusting in? You see, it's the same for all of us who are not ready on our own day of judgment. If we are living selfishly and with pride against God, justice must happen. But for us who trust in Jesus, justice is done by him taking our place. Evil has an expiry date. But maybe for you, you need to know, and you need to have the hope that God will bring injustice to judgment. God does not overlook evil. God does not overlook that dark situation that you find yourself. God is for you and will overcome. There is hope in your darkness that wrongs will be righted. Esther is a book that was written on the walls of the gas chambers and celebrated in the concentration camps, defiantly against the Nazis who said, "You must not speak it." I suspect they had read the book and knew that they were saying, justice will be done. God will hold you accountable. God will save. God will win against those who hate him and work against his will. And finally, I think we can learn and celebrate that God still turns tables. The book of Esther, the festival of Purim, celebrates the moment that God stepped in. What was meant for evil was worked out for good. And God worked through Esther. One person bravely saved a nation. And this theme of reversal was all through the biblical story. We see it in Genesis when Joseph says, "You intend to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Haman, who sought to destroy Mordecai, ends up taking Mordecai's place. And Esther and Mordecai received blessings they did not earn. And God still works like that today. He still turns tables. He still works through unexpected means. And he still pays the price for our redemption, just as he did in the time of Esther and Mordecai. He does for us. There is a promise of justice. God hasn't changed. God still turns tables. God still pays the price to remove from us the penalty that we were due. He takes our place. God even took our place on the stake to appease the righteous anger of a king. God is still giving us blessings that we don't deserve. So as we conclude, last week Richard challenged us by saying, "Who knows that you were made for such a time as this?" Just as Esther stepped out in faith, trusting God's unseen hand, we are called to do the same today. Why? Because we know that God is still working for our good. Therefore, we don't need to fear. Because we know that evil has an expiry date. We don't need to fear stepping out or what has happened to us or what we think will happen to us. And because God still turns tables, we can trust that his plans are for our ultimate good. In a dark world, maybe your world feels dark today. When it seems that God is silent, take heart. God is still at work. He is still faithful, and his promises still stand. Just like Esther, we can step out in faith and trust that God will come through, no matter how dark things seem. We can have confidence in such a time as this. Thank you.